Hello everyone, all colors here. Welcome to the New Bronze Age Collapse podcast, episode 1. First and foremost, I like to keep this podcast totally unscripted. I prepared no script for this episode because I wanted to keep it like a stream of thought. Second, you gotta bear with me for a short while because the first episodes of this series are gonna be recorded without an actual microphone. I gotta buy a new mic. For now, I'm using my smartphone's mic, so please bear with me on that. The first episode of my podcast is gonna be about the fact that I cannot see myself as something that I'm not. What do I mean by that? Now, you know that Sardinia is part of Italy. But many people also know that Sardinians are an ethnic minority. And I'm part of this ethnic minority. I'm sorry. What do I mean by not seeing myself as something that I'm not? It means that I cannot see myself as Italian. Granted, I do have an Italian ID, an Italian passport, and an Italian health insurance card. But that doesn't mean that I'm an actual Italian. That doesn't mean that I'm a member of the Italian nation. That doesn't mean that I'm a member of the Italian ethnic group, which, by the way, doesn't exist. Italy has always been a multi-ethnic country. And at the institutional level, there have been many efforts to trump this sense of multiculturalism and several national and ethnic identities into one state since its inception. It's been like that since 1861. Why should I see myself as Italian? Well, pro-Italians see that, prior to the Kingdom of Italy, it was the Kingdom of Sardinia. Basically, they make the argument that prior to 1861, Sardinia was the main body that put effort into unifying the whole Italian peninsula. You may argue that there were some pro-unification Sardinians, but that doesn't mean that Sardinia was the main actor within the unification of Italy. I mean, the Kingdom of the Savoia was named after our own homeland as a way to strip us away from our own identity. It was named Kingdom of Sardinia to destroy the Sardinian identity. And it's been like that since they inherited it from the Spanish. The first notion of a Kingdom of Sardinia was born in 1420 after the Sardinian-Catalan War and the Sardinian genocide. So, the same way, to put it frankly, our own flag was born. The flag that the region of Sardinia holds right now doesn't represent Sardinia at all. It is actually a staple of the colonial entity that conquered us and exterminated 70% of our population here, displaced us, deported us into the Balearic Islands and Catalonia and to Argentina later on after the Spanish Kingdom conquered South America. What do I mean by? I'm sorry, I gotta rephrase the question. I gotta rephrase the sentence to make myself clear. I think that I can see myself as Italian because it's factually incorrect. My culture is different from Italian culture. My mother tongue is not Italian. I started learning Italian when I was 3 years old, thanks to my parents, because they thought that, if you speak the language, you can integrate yourself much more, much better within the society, which is the way of thinking that most Sardinians right now hold. But my mother tongue is actually Sardinian, and specifically the dialect from the town of Olianese Sardinian, which is like a subset of Nuorese Sardinian, one of the three varieties of the Sardinian language. You got three varieties of Sardinian within the island. The first one is Campidanese, which is spoken mostly in the south, the southeast, and the southwest. Then you got Logudorese, which is mostly spoken in the northwest and in the far north, up to Olbia, the city of Olbia. And then you got Nuorese, which is the dialect spoken in the central part of the island, and it's the most conservative one. Y'all may have heard that Sardinian is the most conservative Romance language out of all the ones that have separated from Latin during the dissolution of the Western Roman Empire. Well, it is, sort of. It's not really a Romance language. Most of the vocabulary that we got right now, and most of the grammar comes from Latin. It does come from Latin, but we got like 30% of our own vocabulary, which is pre-Latin. It is pre-Roman, and it actually dates back to the Paleo-Sardinian period, when we spoke Paleo-Sardinian, when we were the Shardana, the Nuragic civilization. But that doesn't matter when you interact with Italians. They still see Sardinian as a dialect spoken by the peasants. It's spoken by the ignorant people here in the island. They still see it that way, despite the fact that since 1997, Sardinian has been recognized as a minority language. And the reason why it was recognized as a minority language was to trump any national sentiment here. In fact, they recognize Sardinian as a minority language, but they don't recognize Sardinians as an ethnic group. Otherwise, they would be forced into recognizing all of Italy as a multi-ethnic country. There is no such thing as an Italian ethnicity. That is a fact. That is a hard fact. Most people in the Italian peninsula have been unified by force from 1861 to 1870, when they conquered Rome, when Garibaldi entered Rome and conquered it. It's called the Breach of Porta Pia. And during that time, the Vatican State was born from the ashes of the Pontifical State, which governed most of central Italy, most of the central Italian peninsula up until that time. But there is still a but. How have we gotten into the Italian state? As I said, the Catalans conquered us and genocided us. The Spanish inherited the Sardinian kingdom from the Catalans in 1492. But what about the Savoia? The Savoia bought us for 10,000 fiorini, which was the coin at that time, from the Spanish, and then sold us to the Austrians, who didn't want to keep us, and sold us back to the Savoia. The Savoia enforced a policy of forced assimilation, and they did engage in some way in ethnic cleansing. One of the most famous episodes of that is the Battle of San Bartholomew, the night of San Bartholomew, after the revolt of Zuconotto in the town of Nuoro. They took like 1,000 Sardinians and imprisoned them. And after the national court intervened, they freed the majority of those Sardinians. They propagandized this operation as a way to trump banditism here. We had several issues with bandits here. But out of all the 1,000 Sardinians that they took and imprisoned and put into jail, only 60 were bandits. Only 60 were actual criminals. So, looking back, you can see that there was an attempt at ethnic cleansing, the same way they did from 1793 until the start of the 1800s, during the Sardinian Vespers, when they were sent back to Piemonte from Sardinia, and then they came back in with the French. They engaged in massacres, the most famous of which is the massacre of Tiesi, where they killed 17 Sardinian peasants who were protesting against the Savoyard rule. And given all that stuff that happened, I'm gonna add another episode that reflects their operations of ethnic cleansing, their ethnic cleansing policies, regardless of the racial laws here, the Editto delle Chiudende, which we still talk about to this day, and all the other racial segregation laws that were enforced upon us to separate us from the Piedmontese, especially after the perfect fusion between Sardinia and Piedmont to become an actual kingdom of Sardinia. The episode that I want to take into account is the deportation of Sardinian citizens from the island of Lasinara within mainland Sardinian soil. 255 people were deported from the island. There was like a small village which was present since the early Middle Ages. The Asinara island was populated since the Paleolithic, and the settlement there dates back to the Phoenician period. But the actual village was built in the early Middle Ages during Byzantine rule. They shipped those 255 people into mainland Sardinian soil and then displaced them. And many of them were forced into building another settlement, the one which became way later on the town of Stintino. This is another episode. And what I want to say is, after all that, how can I see myself as Italian? There's no reason to. There's no reason why I should. Right? Of course, pro-Italians don't see it that way. And so you gotta bring up the fact that our culture is very much different from Italian culture. Sardinian culture dates back to 8,000 years ago, and to some extent, it still retains those same practices as it did 8,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, during the Roman conquests, during the time of the Sea Peoples. It all stems from that. Our culture is very much different. We still retain pagan beliefs, which, yeah, granted, the peoples in mainland Italy, they do retain their own pagan beliefs to some extent, way less compared to Sardinians, because they have been, forcefully converted by Christians throughout time, way more than we have been. And there's a reason to that, and it's because the Sardinians fought back against the forced conversions during the late Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, and even during the Islamic raids in 1017, 1018, and 1020, when the Arabs from the caliphates, the Arab Muslims from the caliphates came into Sardinian soil and started killing people and forcefully converting them. They never conquered the island, but this is what they did. We always had this fierce resistance against the invaders. Our own culture developed here. We are the indigenous people to Sardinia. Unfortunately, the UN, the EU, and most countries on earth don't see us as indigenous. They see us as an average, they see us as Italian. Most people see us as Italian. They don't recognize the difference. And when you point out that there's a difference between Sardinian and Italian, they reply with, "But you're part of Italy." This is what they bring up. Even the way of living. Like, Sardinians, when they move into mainland Italy, they find the same difficulty in, let's say, integrating themselves that people from other countries find. And it's not being acknowledged. It has never been. In fact, when you speak to sons of immigrants, they reply with, "But you're part of the Italian country, you're Italian." And when you explain to them that Sardinians are not Italian, we speak a different language, we have a different way of living, we have a different way of seeing the world, they reply with, "It's bullshit, you're lying, you're Italian." This is how the world sees us. And this is the reason why I feel it's very important to state that I'm not Italian. This is why I feel it's very important to state that I can't, rationally speaking, I can't call myself Italian because I'm not. I've never been, and I never will be. There's a difference. And most people around the world refuse to acknowledge it. Also, there's another reason why they don't acknowledge us as the indigenous people to Sardinia. And it's the conflict theory that popped out of the cultural Marxist environment. Sardinia, in a way, is the birthplace of cultural Marxism. It is the birthplace of Antonio Gramsci, who was born and raised in the town of Ales, and who graduated first in Cagliari, a university. And he left university. He didn't complete his studies, but I made a mistake. He didn't graduate, he didn't complete his studies, and he moved to Torino. And he started back there, but he didn't complete his studies, once again because he was becoming part of the Communist Party, the newly founded Communist Party, of which he became the secretary, the general secretary. In a way, he undermined the Sardinian cause because he equated our own struggle for self-determination and recognition as the struggle between classes, the persistent revolution of the Marxists. It's not the same thing. We are a national identity. We are a nation. And not only that, most people say, let's say, I don't want to insult anybody, so I'm not going to bring up any examples. But most nations around the world, they see themselves as a tribe in a way. We're not one tribe, we're multiple. And if you go to the Basque Country, they say the same exact thing as we do. They state that there are multiple tribes and not one. you got different dialects of the Basque language. And in the same way, you got different dialects of the Sardinian language, which reflect those tribal differences. And they always did, even prior to the Roman conquest and the Latinization of the Sardinian people. And so it comes pretty easy once you understand this to see that I cannot consider myself Italian. I cannot say that I'm something I'm not. I'm not Italian. I am Sardinian. Anyways, let's wrap it up. I wanted to keep it short. All the episodes of this podcast are gonna be small bullets that I drop out. You know, they are small topics for people to understand Sardinia and Sardinians as a people. Thank you for listening. We'll catch you soon.